Jimmy Fallon in tears when Steven Spielberg suddenly goes silent. After hearing this sound, Steven Spielberg went silent. Not between sentences. Not at the end of a thought. Mid-laugh, mid-gesture, his hands still raised in the air, the sound reached him, and everything stopped. 300 people in Studio 6B heard it too, but they did not understand what they were hearing. Steven Spielberg did. His hand came down slowly. His face changed in a way that 76 years of living had not prepared anyone in that room to recognize. Jimmy Fallon stopped breathing. It was a Thursday evening in November 2023, and The Tonight Show had welcomed Steven Spielberg for what the producers had planned as a relaxed retrospective conversation. 50 years of filmmaking, the craft, the stories behind the stories. The audience had come from everywhere. A retired film professor from Cincinnati had come alone, a lifelong habit. A grandmother from Phoenix had brought her teenage grandson because she wanted him to understand what movies used to mean to people. They had all come for the director they knew, the one who had shaped the way their generation dreamed. The first 30 minutes had been everything they expected. The conversation was warm and wide-ranging, full of the particular generosity that comes from someone who has nothing left to prove. Everything was right. Everything was flowing. The Tonight Show's floor director later said he had worked over 2,000 live tapings in his career and never had to make the decision he made in the next 3 minutes. Then, a producer touched a button in the control room. A sound came through the studio monitors. It was not loud, not orchestrated, just a recording. Old tape, slightly worn at the frequencies, the particular warmth of analog captured decades before digital made everything clean and sourceless. It was a woman's voice, unaccompanied, humming. A melody that had no famous name. Something private and specific, the kind of melody that exists only inside one family, passed down in the unconscious way that families pass things down. In kitchens, in cars, in the half-dark before sleep. Steven Spielberg's right hand, still mid-gesture, lowered to the armrest. His chin dropped a fraction. His eyes did not close, but they went somewhere else entirely. The way eyes go when a sound has reached a place that sight cannot access. His breathing changed. The room could see it change. Jimmy leaned forward. "Steven, hey, you okay?" The entire studio froze. Nobody understood what was happening. A medical question moved silently through 300 minds at once. He was 76. He was sitting very still. Was he unwell? Had something overwhelmed him? The wrong kind of stillness and the right kind look identical from the outside. 300 people held their breath. Questlove's sticks went still above the hi-hat. The cameraman on the floor crane held his position and did not move a single degree. Steven Spielberg's voice, barely above a whisper, but caught perfectly by his microphone, said one word. "Mom, to understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1965. Steven Spielberg wasn't always Steven Spielberg, the director. The institution, the man whose name had become its own category of meaning. In the spring of 1965, he was 18 years old and he was running out of road. His parents had divorced 2 years earlier, a divorce he had spent years believing, in the private logic of a child who needs the world to make sense, was somehow traceable to him, to his particular difficulty, to the relentlessness of his obsessions, and the noise of his ambitions, and the camera that was always in his hand when someone wanted him to be somewhere else. His father was an engineer, practical and precise. His mother was a pianist, alive to things that precision could not reach. The divorce had split the family down that exact line, and Steven had gone with his father to Arizona, and the distance between him and his mother had become geographic and also something harder to name. He had been making films since he was 12. By 18, he had already made a 45-minute science fiction film that had played at a local theater in Phoenix to a paying audience. He knew, with the certainty that some people know things before they can defend it, what he was going to do with his life. What he did not know was whether the cost of knowing that thing so early and so completely, the family it had disturbed, the relationships it had fractured, was something he would ever fully reckon with. In March of 1965, he drove back to Cincinnati to see his mother. Her name was Leah. She was living alone in a small house near the university, teaching piano lessons to neighborhood children, keeping the particular kind of busy that people keep when they are managing their own sadness. She cooked dinner the night he arrived, the way she always cooked, elaborately and with complete attention, as though the meal itself was a form of communication. After dinner, they sat at the kitchen table and did not talk about the divorce or the distance or any of the things that were plainly present in the room with them. She hummed instead. It was a habit she had always had, a melody she returned to when she was thinking or washing dishes or sitting quietly in the car. He had grown up with that sound at the edge of everything, at the edge of sleep, at the edge of arguments, at the edge of the particular silence that falls in a house the morning after something has broken. He had never asked her what the melody was. He wasn't certain it was anything. It sounded like something she had invented without knowing she was inventing it. He asked her that night. She looked at him for a moment. She said it was something her own mother had hummed in their kitchen in Cincinnati when she was a girl, that her mother had probably never known where it came from either, that it was the kind of thing that moved through families without anyone deciding to keep it. He asked her to hum it again, slowly, while he held the small reel-to-reel recorder he had brought in from the car, because he brought it everywhere, because the habit of capturing things was so deep in him by then that he no longer noticed doing it. She hummed it twice. The second time, he thought she had forgotten he was recording. She was looking out the window at the backyard, at the dark yard and the trees she had planted the year they moved in. The recording caught her voice and the faint sound of the refrigerator, and, very far back, a car passing on the street. He drove back to Arizona the next morning. They did not resolve the things that needed resolving, because some things resolve slowly over decades, and some things never resolve at all. But he had the recording. He kept it in the same case as his camera equipment, taped to the inside lid with the date written on the label in his handwriting, March 1965. Leah, Kitchen the Films, came the way everyone knows the films came. And through all of it, through Jaws and Close Encounters and Raiders and E.T. and Schindler's List and everything that came after, through all the decades and all the distance traveled from an 18-year-old with a borrowed lens and a certainty he couldn't explain, he kept the recording. His mother died in 2017. He had made his peace with her long before that, and she with him, in the slow and imperfect way that families make peace, not in a single conversation, but in the accumulation of smaller ones, over years, until one day the thing that had been heavy was simply a part of the weight you carried without noticing. After she died, he gave the recording to an archivist at his production company. He told her to transfer it from the reel-to-reel to digital and to keep it safe. He did not tell her what it was or why it mattered. She had worked for him for 11 years and understood that not everything needed explaining. Her name was Margaret Chu. She had been diagnosed with ALS 18 months ago. She had told no one at work for the first 8 months, managing the tremor in her hands by changing the way she held things, and no one had noticed because she had always been the most composed person in any room she occupied. When she finally told him, he had not reacted the way people react to news like that. He had sat across from her at the conference table and looked at her steadily and said, "What do you need?" She had said she needed him to know that the recording was safe, that she had kept it safe for 11 years, and she intended to keep it safe until she couldn't anymore. That whoever came after her would know what it was and why it mattered. He had thanked her. He had meant it in every way that a person can mean a thing. 3 weeks later, she reached out to The Tonight Show. She had taken it upon herself, without being asked, without telling him, because she believed that stories worth keeping were also worth telling, and because she had spent 11 years watching a man archive the world and understood, with the intimacy that comes from proximity to someone's working life, that some things he had never found a way to say out loud. She had written the note to the producers herself, from her apartment on a Tuesday evening, her left hand steadying her right as she typed. She asked only that he hear his mother's voice one more time, on camera, in a room full of people who understood what his work had meant. She asked for nothing else. The response came within 48 hours. Behind the scenes, Steven Spielberg had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He had asked the Tonight Show team to seat Margaret Cho in the front row, the nearest possible distance from the stage, and to tell no one, not the floor director, not the band, not Jimmy Fallon, only that a specific guest would be present that evening. He had reviewed the digital transfer of the recording himself, alone in his editing suite at 6 a.m. 3 days before the taping, and he had listened to it twice. And then he had sat in the dark for a while before turning the lights back on. He had chosen the moment himself, not announced, not explained, just played, the way his mother had always hummed it, without deciding to, at the edge of everything. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home ever saw coming. The humming faded out through the monitors, and the studio held its silence, and Steven Spielberg sat in the chair with his hands in his lap, very still, looking at a point in the middle distance that was not a point in the room at all. Jimmy Fallon had tears running down his face and was not trying to stop them. Then Steven turned his head and looked at the front row. Margaret Cho was sitting there in a dark coat, her hands folded in her lap, watching him with the composed and steady attention she had brought to 11 years of keeping everything safe. He stood up. The director did not cut to commercial. The cameraman on the floor crane tilted down and held. Questlove stood up from behind the drum kit without a sound. Steven Spielberg stepped down from the interview platform and crossed the studio floor to the front row and stood in front of Margaret Cho. And she looked up at him, and he looked down at her. And neither of them spoke for a moment that was long enough for the whole room to understand what it was witnessing. "You didn't have to do this," he said. She looked at him with the steadiness she always had. "I know. Why did you?" A pause. Her hands still folded in her lap. "Because you kept it for 60 years. I thought someone should know why." His jaw moved. He looked down. "She used to hum it at the kitchen window. I never told her I recorded it." "I know," Margaret said. "I listened to it." You can hear her not knowing. Something crossed his face that 60 years of directing other people's expressions had not made him any better at hiding. "She'd have liked that you kept it. She'd have liked that you asked her about it." He sat down beside her. Right there in the front row, in the seat next to hers, and he was quiet for a moment, and she was quiet with him, and the studio was quiet around them both. Jimmy Fallon pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. He walked to the edge of the platform, not over the desk, just to the very edge. And he knelt there and said nothing for a long time, and then looked out at 300 people who were all standing now, every one of them, in the way people stand when something true has happened in front of them. "Folks," he said finally, his voice not quite steady, "I think we need to let this happen." share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Margaret Chu passed away 9 months later, on a Wednesday afternoon in August, at her apartment in Los Angeles, with the windows open and the sound of the city coming in the way it always had. Steven Spielberg did not speak at the service because she had specifically asked him not to. She had told him, with the directness she always had, that she wanted him in the audience, not at the podium. He sat in the third row in a plain dark suit and listened to the people who stood up and spoke about her. And he did not try to compose his face. The original reel-to-reel tape, the one labeled March 1965, Leah, Kitchen, in an 18-year-old's handwriting, was transferred into the permanent collection of the Academy Film Archive that fall, with a note attached in Margaret's handwriting that gave its provenance and its contents, and one final line that the archivist, when she read it, did not remove. It said, "He thought he was recording the melody. He was recording the whole room."